Welcome back to part 3 of the 1982 Kawasaki 750 Limited Rebuild engine withdrawal. Well, the engine has been pulled, as you can see here. What I'm now planning to do is take off the valve cover and check the valve clearances first before I dive further into the engine, which I need to do anyway. And then of course I'll be connecting the cam chain, as I did previously when I first took out the engine, to the ceiling. So we'll keep that under tension, which we need to do. And then probably tomorrow evening I'll remove the valve head, which I'll take over to my friend Ted this coming Saturday to check out the intake valve on cylinder number 3. Now, the valve cover could have been taken off also if the engine is still in the frame, which you need to do when you think you have an issue with your valve clearances. Now, because I'm taking off the valve head anyway, or the cylinder head, I needed to pull the engine, otherwise it would be impossible. Now, the valve cover, it doesn't give a specific order in which you tighten down or loosen the cover. So there's no specific order in this valve cover. But on the other hand, you know, just thinking about it logically, I will be doing a sort of a crisscross pattern over the valve cover to have the right balance and not have too much tension on parts of the engine. So let me take off the valve cover first, and then we'll get into checking the clearances of the valves. Here we go. Well, here we are. It's going to take a while to take out 24 bolts holding on the valve cover. So that's been done now. They're all out, bagged and put away separately. Now when we take off this valve cover, we might have to slightly hit it just very softly with either a rubber hammer or a hammer with a wooden block to loosen it from the gasket, which is sealing. And of course you don't want to lose your half moon seals, 4 of them on total. Easy to replace, but if they're still okay, they're reusable. So let me carefully take off the valve cover and the half moons and take it from there. Right, well, the valve cover came off easily, no rubber hammer needed. So here we have it lying upside down. I'll put it away safely in a moment before I continue work on the engine. So what we're going to do now first is just check all the valve clearances while we're working on the engine and tearing down the engine. We might as well at least see what the valve clearances are reading. I did check this twice beforehand, so I'm quite confident that these are still okay. And the main thing will be to of course take off the head and check intake valve number 3. So let's start with measuring the valve clearances. This is a nice thing about using a little bit larger zip bags, because I can just put in the whole right side cover, including the bolts, to keep that in one bag. As you see here, I've taken off the right side cover where the pickup coils are housed, and that's because we need to rotate the engine in order to measure the valve clearances. Now, an important issue here is that we actually use the correct tools, and as you see here, we're going to be using a 17 mil onto this bolt. So we're not going to use the smaller outer bolt. You don't want to use that one. You want to use the larger inner bolt when turning your engine, which fits on here fine. Why am I using this one? Because the pickup coils are housed quite near to the bolt, and I don't want to take off the pickup coil assembly, and I don't want to harm the pickup coils when I turn the engine. So this is the ideal tool to fix to the bolt and turn by hand so we can measure the valve clearances. Off we go. with regards to measuring the valve clearances, you want the broader lobe side of the camshaft, like this one is here. You see the smaller tapered side is opposite to the tappet, and the wider lobe on the camshaft is actually 90 degrees to the tappet underneath, and that is where you measure the valve clearance. And you do this one by one and make sure that just going down all the 4 cylinders, intake and exhaust valves, that you measure them one by one, always rotating clockwise, not counterclockwise but clockwise. If you go too far, just keep on rotating clockwise until you get there again, and you just measure them one by one with a feeler gauge in between the wider side of the lobe versus the tappet underneath. So let's get started. I'll get a pen and paper so we can put everything down and measure the valve clearances. Well, if we look in the service manual, it says valve clearance is cold. The engine is cold. And it gives you exactly the valve clearance which it should be, and that's between 0.08 and 0.18 millimeters, or 0.0031 to 0.0070 inch. So my feeler gauge will be testing, or at least checking, if the valve clearances are between the 0.08 or the 0.18. So let's get started. Now it may look a little bit dirty, but these are the measurements I made the last time that I actually had to change one of the shims in one of the valves, which was incorrect. And it's always interesting to put the new measurements underneath to see if there any changes have taken place. So let's get started. As you can see, each one is numbered: 8, 7, 6, and so on. So it's very easy to know where you are and write down the correct measurements for the right intake or exhaust valve. Well, we're at intake valve number 4, which is actually numbered number 8. And what you're looking for is just the slightest resistance in between the lobe of the camshaft and the tappet underneath. And here you can see that the 0.10 fits it exactly with just the very slightest resistance. So we know that this one is actually at 1.10, which is within the spec of 0.08 or 0.18. So we know that intake valve number 4, actually numbered number 8, is within spec, and now we're going to turn the engine and go to the next valve and measure that one, which is actually intake valve number 3. That's giving us the issues. So let's try that. Well, as you can see, I turned the engine and the lobe is actually now 90 degrees to the tappet underneath, as it's meant to be before we make the measurement. And this is intake valve number 3. And I feel some resistance at 0.15. When I try 0.2, it will just not fit. So this one is also within spec. Now, intake valve number 3, this is the one that's giving me an issue, is not related to the valve clearance. So we check that by doing this, that something has to be wrong with the valve inside the head. Either we have a valve that's sticking, or a valve that is partially burnt out or is not correctly seated into the head. So let me check the other valve clearances, finish up the checking of the clearances, and start rigging up the cord, the elastic cord that I'll need to put tension on the cam chain so we can take out the cams and loosen the head and take off the head. Right, well, I just measured that intake valve number 1 is way too tight. As you can see here, the lobe is again 90 degrees to the tappet underneath, and I can't even get an 0.05 millimeter feeler gauge in between. So that means that intake number 5 is way too tight, and that is actually very unexpected on my behalf. So I'll note that down. I've got enough shims laying around, so this one I'll have to solve. Right, I finished all the measurements of the valve clearances, and a few interesting things have come up. The exhaust valve in cylinder number 1 went from an 0.16 a month ago to an 0.12 now. Exhaust valve cylinder number 2, 0.16, 0.15, that's about the same. With regards to 3, roughly the same, and with regards to 4 also. So on the exhaust valve, only cylinder number 1 has some change in the clearance. When I go to the intake, then you see here cylinder 1 intake is roughly the same, only now it's too tight. I cannot get an 0.05 feeler gauge, so it's you know, it's not within the tolerances, it's just too tight, so I have to do something on intake valve in cylinder number 1. Then we get cylinder number 2 intake. Now that's a significant change from 0.05 roughly to 0.06 all the way up to 0.15, so we're at the top of the range at intake number 2. Number 7, which is actually intake cylinder number 3, which is giving me the issues, jumped from an 0.05 to 0.06 to 0.15. So that's quite a change. And intake cylinder 4, number 8 is went from an 0.15 roughly to an 0.10. So these are the new measurements. So that gives me an idea what's going on. 6 out of 8 are at the high side of the tolerance levels. You know, from the exhaust valves, it's not such a big issue to have them at the higher side of the spectrum, because they do get the hottest. So that's as far as I'm concerned, that's okay with me. And on the intake side, roughly 3 that are more or less in range, and 1 that is just way too tight, so I need to change 1 anyway. So that gives me some information before we put some tension on the elastic cord for the distribution chain, and take off the camshafts and then take off the head. Well, this is sort of my second time around homemade solution on a cam chain tensioner that I fixed. It's just a piece of rope put around the beam which is holding up the light here, and put a knot at the right height. This is an elastic cord that connects to the cam chain, so when I loosen the 2 cams, then I know I'll keep tension on the cam chain, which is important. So that solves that issue. Now the cams are put in a certain order, and I'm going to take them out in the reverse order. Just so you know, I'm going to do everything by the book. So look in your manual, find out in which order to put in the cams, put in the bolts one by one, and take them out in reverse. So here we go. Well, as I mentioned, we're talking here about a camshaft cap bolt tightening sequence, and it's all numbered, so that's easy. And instead of going from 1 up to 8, just take it down from 8 to 1. So do the reverse sequence in loosening the cams. Now, as you can see here, this is the sequence to the cylinder head nut tightening, and I have to take this in reverse also. And you see that number 14 and number 13 are lying deep within the cylinder head, which is underneath the cams. So I cannot start unscrewing or loosening these bolts of the head until I've taken out the cams first, because I have to start with the two bolts that are hidden underneath the cam gears. They're hard to see, so I need to take out the cams first. So let's do that. Now, as you see, I've taken off the first corner one, which I have here, and when taking out the bolts, it could still be stuck to the head. So the easiest thing is to give it a few light taps with a rubber hammer. Don't force anything, don't put a screwdriver in between them to pry them off. Just slightly tap it with a rubber mallet, a rubber hammer, and slowly pull it loose, and everything will be okay. Just a little tip on my behalf. Right, well, as you see here, I have taken off both cams. They're lying over here in the valve cover to keep them safe. I bagged everything separately, so the bolts and each of the brackets for the cams have been bagged separately. Just two tips for you. One, there is going to be some tension on the camshafts, so when you loosen them, try to push them down while you loosen the bolts, otherwise they might jump at you. And the other thing is, especially with the bolts and these small keepers that keep them in place, line up the valve cover, we do now have an open engine, so please be careful not to drop anything in the engine, otherwise your problems have just become worse. So please try to be aware of that fact. So now I'm going to take out the bolts of the valve head, starting with the two inside bolts. So we're going to do it in reverse direction, and then of course the outside bolts, and then loosen the head. And if it's stuck a little bit because of the gasket, I'll use the rubber mallet to make sure it comes loose. So let's loosen the bolts in the reverse sequence. Right, with regards to these inside two bolts, that's bolts like this, two on the inside, they're on the open engine side. Put in a cloth in between that you can take out again before screwing the bolt out, so you don't lose the bolt in your engine. Just don't take the chance. Put a piece of cloth snugly in between so you don't lose the bolt in the engine. Well, as you can see, I got out all the bolts in the reverse sequence as I mentioned before, and this means that, well, at the moment I also took out the washers just to make sure. I mean, when you take off the head, the washers are still on there, you might lose them, and worst thing is you'll lose them in your engine. So I've taken everything out, and I've already seen that the head is loose, so that's not going to be an issue. So I'll carefully take off the head now, and cover up the engine, and we'll have a first look at the valves inside. Well, as you can see here, I've taken off the head by myself. It's a matter of pulling up the head, keeping it at a distance, get your hand in between the head and the cylinders, so you can keep tension on the cam chain. Then put the head away with one hand while holding tension on the cam chain, and just put it back up once you put down the valve head. So here we are. It's empty, as you can see. Interesting. Maybe you see the color difference in cylinder number 3, cylinder 2, cylinder 1. Just to give you an idea what they look like on the inside. Maybe just a little bit of a better shot. Cylinder 4, cylinder 3, cylinder 2, and cylinder 1. So let me have a look at the underside of the valve head. Now, before we have a look at the valves and the valve head, I thought I'd just show you that I've covered up the engine. The last thing I want to happen is that something falls into the engine, so now that cannot happen, which is important. So let's have a look at the valves. Well, it's difficult to see, and we're talking about number 3 intake. So if I count correctly and turn the valve head around, then this is intake number 3, and it's very difficult to see what the issue is with intake number 3. So it does look like it's a little bit flatter, the valve, on this side here, and these are more pronounced, if I may say it in that English. This one is also more pronounced, as you can see. Same goes for this one, and this one here is quite flat, so I think it's not seating correctly, or it's partially worn. So I'll have Ted look at it on Saturday, and I think it probably is going to need a new intake valve for cylinder number 3 to solve the problem. And after that's been solved, then we can put everything back together and take it from there. Now be careful, because you do have these rubber O-rings, 2 of them here, one here of course, and one on this side, that you don't want to lose. I do have a few spare, but even so, if you don't lose them, the same goes for over here, these small little things where the oil goes through. Don't lose those. The gasket, by the way, stayed perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with the gasket, both of them. So I'm not going to change the gaskets. It wasn't leaking a drop of oil, and the gaskets still look as they are new. So I'm not going to do anything with that. Well, that's it for now. I'm going to take it over to Ted on Saturday. It's now Wednesday evening, so I have 2 days to wait, and I'll film it when it's over at Ted, and we'll find out what's really wrong with it and probably put in a new valve for intake number 3. So I'll be back. Have a good evening, and thanks for watching. Bye bye.